1, 2, 3. Excellent. All right, it is my great pleasure to welcome Rachael Tatman, who has her PhD in computational social linguistics from the University of Washington, where her research primarily focused on sublexical units in speech, text, and sign, as well as ethics in NLP. After graduating, she moved into industry, working as a data scientist at Kaggle and a developer advocate into Google. And now she's a senior developer advocate at Rasa, where she supports open source chatbot development framework. And also, if you don't follow her on Twitter, you totally should. So with that, the floor is yours, Rachael.
Thank you. Let me share my screen real quick. There we go. Hello, everyone, wherever it is, or I guess whenever it is for you. Today, I'm going to talk about chatbots, which is what I work on day to day, so perhaps not surprising, and that they can be good, and that part of making chatbots good is learning from unhappy users, which I'm going to argue are a type of negative result. So as I mentioned, I'm at Rasa, and also I have a secondary affiliation right now. I'm adjuncting at the University of Michigan at iSchool in their Masters of Data Science program. So my name is Rachael. Hi, lovely introduction. And I work on chatbots. And usually when I tell people that, I get a range of reactions. And often one of those reactions is people who have had bad experiences with chatbots telling me about them. So I have had a very easy time scraping some examples of people having bad experiences with chatbots from Twitter. So in this example, this user says, I hate chatbots, and it's a screenshot of a conversation. And the assistant says, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Please type A, B, C, or D to be transferred for an agent. And the B option is the sunglasses smiling emoji. And when the user responds with that B colon sunglasses smiling emoji, the assistant gives him an error and says, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. So this character pair is being rendered as an emoji, and the user, as a result, cannot have the intended interaction with the chatbot. I got another example. So this one is from somebody else who hates chatbots. They're talking to a FedEx chatbot. The FedEx chatbot says 1 p.m. or 1 a.m. The user says 1 p.m. The chatbot says, did you say 1 a.m.? The user says 1 p.m. The chatbot says, did you say 1 a.m.? The user says 1 p.m. And it continues in that vein for a while. Very frustrating conversation, I'm sure. And then a last example, someone who is interacting with a chatbot in a context where the chatbot has a human's face and a human's name, Jessica in this case, and the chatbot says, hey, how may I assist you today? And the user says, what are your early cancellation fees? And the chatbot says, click here to see how to contact us. So this user feels misled and upset. All of these are a bad time, right? There are people having a bad time with an NLP system. This indicates that each of these systems is failing in some way, and in a way that is affecting real users in a very frustrating way. So I think a useful question to ask is, what do users' reactions to these unsuccessful chatbots tell us? Because it's a lot. So I think the primary thing that it tells us, or at least me as someone with a very deep background in linguistics, is that users have very strong intuitions about how conversation should go. They know what should happen, and when it doesn't happen, they're frustrated because those intuitions are violated. And I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. We've all done conversation at some point in our life in some format. We all have pretty good understandings about those unwritten rules, one might even say pragmatics, that govern how a conversation goes. And when those rules are not followed, it's upsetting. And also that they care, that users want these systems to work well. If something doesn't work, but also it doesn't really matter to you, then it's not an issue, right? Like a sticking parking brake on a model of car I don't own, I'm not going to talk about. It doesn't bother me, but this is something that does matter and isn't working, and that's frustrating. I think it also tells us that users really think that we can do better. And I say we broadly here, both NLP researchers in terms of developing new approaches, and also practitioners in terms of implementing those approaches. There is a belief that the systems can be better and that they should be better. And I think that all of that is good to know and good, rich, useful information. But best of all, from my point of view, is that all of these interactions where something happened that was frustrating or bad or upsetting, we can see by looking at those the exact thing that went wrong, and therefore how to fix it, which is fabulous, right? They have told us what the problem is. Now we only need to go through and make it better. And you may be saying to yourself,
If you don't mind, could you just like quickly comment on your thing?
Yes.
I think somebody is maybe
Get
not
back to the
muted.
original one, so we can see what it looks like before.
Yes.
Maybe
In case something
Jack.
actually mess up for the embedding part, maybe it's mentioned doesn't match or something.
Yes.
I'll give you a second,
That
sorry.
wasn't really an issue, but just in case.
Yes. And then set trace.
I think you studied that, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna move it above the.
Again, the
No,
delights of
or-
online conferences.
Yeah, I guess you're right. We still need this part.
It's just like you just write it over, just don't need to do content more. That's
Jackie, your mic's on.
Where does it go? There we go.
Jackie, your mic's on.
So we just quit this one, right?
I think
My friend, you're being very loud. Okay.
What happened?
I guess I will just soldier on and
I
talk.
think it's just like localizer caching like
Oh.
issues.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Happens to all of us. So many of you may have had a chance to now really think about your response to me talking about these errors. And you may have said to yourself, well, those are errors. Errors do not necessarily make a negative result, right? A negative result is a system level, problem. The experiment went wrong. To which I would respond that in the context of building chatbots in industry, obviously, maybe this isn't obvious. It's a very varied field. There's a lot of use cases. There's lots of levels of complexity. There's lots of levels of budget, both in terms of engineering time and compute, scale, right? It's very varied. There's everything from, simple question answering bots that are completely built with regex and run on one person's laptop all the way to, chatbots that are handling millions and millions of queries a second. But with that in mind, a lot of chatbot systems that are built in iteration are not built using, traditional model comparison. They tend to be built iteratively instead. And if there is comparison, it might be of the way that like, hey, this update resulted in some sort of issue and we're going to roll back to the last update. So in order to do A/B testing on chatbots, which is, I think, more common with other types of NLP systems, you really need to have a sort of scale and engineering time commitment that not all chatbot builders have. And as a result, the negative results in the development of the life cycle, because there's always going to be something that doesn't work, right? In real engineering where things are messy and there's timelines and problems. The negative results are points on a timeline, right? So as I was iterating through the system, there was an issue at a specific point in time, and that was the negative result. And I know that there was a negative result. I know that this particular experiment failed, and I need to, add more data or change our conversation flows or add more intents, whatever it is that I need to change in the assistant by looking at that data and then changing the model and updating the model. So it's not quite it's not really the same paradigm of approaching system development that you often will use in NLP research outside of industry, because it needs to get built and there's a timeline. So with that aside, just very broadly, my stance is that systems that people actively hate using are a failure of engineering, particularly when it comes to language technology, because people like using language for the most part. Most humans are pretty good at it. It's something that we are well equipped to do. And if I have a system that I'm very fluent in and very comfortable in, and using that system when it interfaces with a technical system is a bad time, it's the technical system's fault, right? It is not the problem of language itself. If that makes sense. So I think that this leads to a cascade of questions, because certainly my impetus to get into the field of NLP in the first place was that I wanted to help build systems that worked, that genuinely made people's lives better, that improved the world. I like to use the example of spell check. I'm dyslexic. I can't spell very good. There will probably be typos somewhere in this that I didn't fix on some of my many editing passes. Autocorrect has been an enormous time saver for me. I don't think I would have gotten a PhD if I'd had to have done everything on a typewriter, just for the enormous mental load that would have added to the process. So I think hopefully, we all share this desire to build systems that work and make the life better for people and that, can be maintained and improved over time. So wanting to do that, we need to be able to tell when they're working. So not just, does this particular one piece in isolation work, but does the system as a whole work? Is it doing what I want it to do? And how do we tell whether something works or not? Well, we measure it in some way. So what is it that we're measuring? What is important for us to look at? And my big argument here is that you can't do that with a single metric. With pretty much any NLP system in production, there's going to be multiple things you care about. There's going to be multiple things that you have to balance and decide what you value, what you can invest in. And really, it's never going to boil down to a single point on a graph, as convenient as that would be. And how you know that you have a system that's not feasible for your application, a negative result, is going to be through a combination of these metrics. And at this point, you may be wondering to yourself, well, that would make it really hard to compare some systems on a leaderboard if you don't have some sort of like composite measure of system quality in a specific application, to which I say, leaderboards do not really affect me much in my day-to-day work, helping people build systems at the coalface in the world, outside of a research setting that's maybe removed several steps from actually having to put the systems into production in front of users. I see their utility. I don't know that that having something that works on a leaderboard is important for maybe even the majority of NLP that gets done. So I've said that they are not enough. I'm not saying that they're not necessary. They're very useful, but you lose information. And I think that we all instinctively as language users know this. We know that there's additional complexity, that it's hard to numericize, quantify, and measure. So just as an example of some sort of absurd situations where a single measure is clearly not capturing the relevant information, how would you rate your favorite story as a child? Well, is it how much you enjoyed it as a child? Is it how well it's written? Is it, sentence length, reading level, something like that? It's, that is a hard measure to create, and it's one that might change over time. It would change between individuals. Or imagining that you're sitting with a big group of your friends, maybe on Zoom, and you're chatting back and forth. Could you go through and assign each of your friends a score on how well they're doing in the conversation, right? How well are they selecting the next turn in this conversational flow between individuals? Even in a specific situation, I don't think that would be a consistent number, and I don't think it would be consistent across individuals in the conversation, right? So one person might be like, oh, I'm killing this conversation, I'm doing a great job. And someone else is like, you said something like really weird and have ruined the flow of conversation, or maybe you're dominating the floor a little bit. So it's not something that there is like an objective third-party measure that will capture well. There's sentiment analysis, which is perhaps a useful but not very detailed measure of emotion, which setting aside emotion detection as a task, I think it's very difficult to quantify, emotions in general, but also things that might have some mixed feelings. So maybe a loved one's voice, maybe you're happy to hear them, maybe you're sad you're not with them, maybe you're annoyed that you're with them. I don't know what your relationship that you're thinking of is here. Or again, talking about conversations again, imagine a large group conversation, maybe a meeting. If you went through and you asked everybody in the meeting to rate how well the meeting went, you would probably get different numbers from everybody unless it was awful. I think there's probably a floor on meeting quality, and if you hit that, then most people would agree that the meeting is bad. So there's not really there's a lot of information that we lose when we quantify things, and there's a lot of information that is available to everyone who's using the system, but would be very difficult to extract and that there might not be agreement on. So that's all to say, like, I don't think I need to like hit this point anymore, but single measures are lossy. They don't tell us everything that we need to know. On the other hand, they're useful. I would certainly not want to try to optimize on, the feeling of hearing a loved one's voice. They're super helpful for loss functions, for optimization problems. It's something we've all worked with. They can be very useful if you have a very controlled environment and you're comparing systems in that controlled environment. Like I said, I don't think leaderboards aren't useful. I think they're just not useful for me in my work. But again, they're not useful everywhere. So if you need a deep understanding of how well a system is working for users, is it actually solving their problem? It's really difficult to get a single measure for that. And it's also really difficult to find out where conversations are failing and how to fix them. So the conversations that I showed you in the beginning, we'll come back to them, all failed in different ways, right? So even if you had a metric that was like, these conversations are bad, and I don't know that you'd necessarily be able to get that, in the same way for all three of those conversations, you still wouldn't necessarily know the vector along which they were bad and how to fix them. So with that in mind, I said one measure won't work. Okay, so we need a lot. What are we measuring, Rachel? You can't just say one metric is bad and then not give anything into that that space that you poked. So number one, tests. So repeatable expected baseline behavior should be repeatable and should work as expected. So these are your unit tests, your integration tests. We'll talk a little bit about more on that later on. You don't ship software without it. Also, because many NLP systems these days have a machine learning component, some way of ensuring or showing that your model is continuing to work well in unseen circumstances. So model performance on held out data. I would also strongly recommend novel data. We all know, I don't know, maybe we all don't know, language changes, and that can be, long-term changes in linguistic systems, but it can also be short-term systems changes in like the topics that people talk about. So as an example, when I started my current role in January 2022, January 2020, most people were not asking about infectious disease as part of their routine chatbot flow. Now many people are. So that's been a major language change. Can your system handle it? Does it need to be retrained or updated? In addition, application-specific measures of success. So if you are building a chatbot, occasionally people will build chatbots for fun, but almost always people are building chatbots for a job, for some work, and there is a reason that they are building that chatbot, and they are trying to fulfill a specific task. So how well are you doing that task? And there are a lot of different measures here. So click-through rate is a common one. Time saved is one of my favorites. Can people get through your system faster with a chatbot than they can without? I think that's a great use of chatbots. Other key performance indicators, KPIs, and this will really depend on your specific application. It'll depend on what your organization cares about. It will depend on your existing processes. You may have like one executive who comes in and uses a chatbot once a week, and if they have a bad experience, they write you an Instagram. I don't know. It could be anything. But does the thing that you built do the thing that you built it to do? And also feasibility. So I think in an ideal world, we'd all have, infinite compute, infinite engineering, infinite data. There would be no problems and limitations here. But in this world that I live in, those are major limitations. So how much time is it going to take to build this system? How much work is it going to take? Is it going to be something that, maybe a little bit time consuming, but my engineering team is going to have a lot of overhead left to like do focus work after that, or is it going to be totally consuming? Compute. So this is a great example of why leaderboards are not always most useful for me. Sure, system X may have in a research setting performed better, but if it costs $1,000 a month in compute and your budget is $500, it's not feasible. You're just not going to be able to use it. And also support burden. How much time continuing in perpetuity is it going to take to build and maintain the system and make sure that it keeps working? Add functionality as needed, remove functionality as needed, make sure that you are in compliance, right? So if new privacy legislation comes in, who's fixing the bot to make sure that you are abiding by that? All sorts of things like that, which, I think these are constraints that everybody face, but if people are using this system, they are very real, very immediate. And then finally, qualitative analysis. So hopefully, I don't know, hopefully at least some of you have had time to do qualitative analysis of text output in various settings. It is very time consuming. It's very difficult. Even if you have, a lot of annotators and annotation time, that doesn't necessarily mean that the results are going to be straightforward or there's going to be a lot of agreement between annotators even. But this is the thing that reflects what users are doing, right? So if I'm a user and I'm interacting with a chatbot, I don't know about the whole system. I know about the conversation I had and my qualitative experience with the assistant. And maybe that can be boiled down to, did I do the thing I came here to do or not? Or maybe it can't. Maybe I did the thing that I came here to do, but the chatbot said something that was, deeply insensitive to me in my cultural setting. That's going to be really hard to pick up on without some sort of qualitative analysis. And yeah, it's hard, right? There's a lot of things to think about. There's a lot of things to look at. And if you are working on a system and this is your main job, it's important that these things work and that you are appropriately apportioning your time, not appropriating. So let's talk a little bit about how this would fit into the actual product development lifecycle. Because I know this is a lot of things. Software is hard to build. There's a lot going on. We use at Raza a framework called conversation-driven development. It's specifically developed for chatbots. I think there's a larger trend in, sort of industry machine learning in general towards there's lots of different terms for it, but basically looking at data quality and monitoring your data and changing your data and making sure that it is meeting your needs, not just at the data cleaning stage of modeling, but in deployment as a way to improve system performance over time is becoming more and more common. So this is our way of talking about it, but this sort of general process is, as I mentioned, becoming more common. And also the specifics here are mostly not chatbot specifics, right? Like obviously our software is chatbot specific, but the general process is applicable to other types of systems as well. These are the steps. We're going to talk about them in depth. First off, sharing. As soon as possible, get your system in front of people. This is very true for conversational systems, but anything where you're going to be interacting with people, it's very important to make sure that there are people who are not the engineers who are building the systems involved ASAP. It is very hard to predict what people will do. They will continue to surprise you, and you want to make sure that you know about those surprises as soon as possible. So yeah, we internally at least, we'll often sort of like tap each other and be like, hey, I'm working on a chatbot, can you run through it as the first step, and then increasing more and more test users over time, and then once the system's in a very robust state, then sharing it out. But even with that, once it's in production, continuing to review your data. So this is the stage where I think most people get sad. Maybe not sad. You gotta look at your data. I know this isn't necessarily why you signed up for this field, but if you are working with language technology, you have to look at the language. There has to be some sort of qualitative analysis. And it doesn't necessarily all have to be, the machine learning engineers that are doing this. Some places will outsource it. We've been working at Raza on a number of research projects to try and help streamline this process. So we have a system called unexpected intent that will flag turns that are surprising in some way to sort of bump them to the top of the review queue to help use time most efficiently. We've got some blog posts and I think an archive paper on that if you're interested. But that streamlines the manual review process. It does not remove it, right? conversational quality is a qualitative measure, and you need to read conversations. Also, this screenshot is from software that we produce called RazaX. It's free but not open source. It's just for this annotation process. And then there's an enterprise version if you want the enterprise version and need the sort of fancier features. And that's how we make money, because sometimes I get questions about that. So I think this is a great example of a conversation where you would really only see that something went wrong in reviewing it, right? It would be hard for me to, since this is just like, it's a 3-turn conversation, which, if I'm optimizing for conversation length and having people come in and out really quickly, this might look great in my metrics. Maybe this person clicks through the click here, so I'm like, oh, great, they did the thing I asked them to do. But looking at this conversation, I can see that the answer to the user turn is not necessarily what the user expected, right? The user wanted a specific piece of information, and I did not give them that piece of information. And by looking at it with my eyeballs, I can see that the user had an expectation for the system that was not fulfilled. Maybe this is something that we should add. We might be able to handle questions about cancellation fees automatically. It would save everybody time. So you've looked with your eyeballs. What do you do now? You annotate the data. And I've had a lot of questions, particularly from people who, are sort of newer to NLP or haven't spent a lot of time working on machine learning, which is a big chunk of the people who are working on NLP systems. Hey, I learned about reinforcement learning, or like data generation. Can I use that as a way to train chatbots? And I, in general, don't recommend that people do that. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Lewis 2017 paper out of Facebook Research on the systems that were using reinforcement learning to do negotiating, I think was the specific task. And they succeeded in negotiating with each other and, did really well on the specific task as it was phrased. The language output is, I would say, not very human-like. And I would really caution against using data that has not undergone some sort of rigorous quality testing in training your chatbot, and that quality testing, should probably look at how human-like it is. And the benefit is that if you are building a system like this, right, and you're sharing it with test users, they have said things back to the system, and you can use that as training examples, and it will be exactly what people would say to the system because people did say it to the system. So it is, it feels like it might be a time saver, but in my experience, it almost never is and ends up in a lot of frustration. And then this is, again, our interface for doing that, but you can do your own thing. And then testing. I hope that everyone is already very familiar with testing and this is just review, but you got to make your tests. So for our end-to-end tests of the system, within the chatbot engine itself, we have end-to-end conversations, and you run those as tests. So you're like, hey, this is a conversation, this is how it should go, and you make sure that those core conversations always go the same way. Running them as continuous integration, make sure that you're continuously doing stuff. And this is specifically for unit tests. Integration tests will be dependent on the system that you integrate with. But at the testing stage is really where these should have been caught. So this example where the FedEx chatbot says, hey, 1 p.m. or 1 a.m., and the user says 1 p.m., and the chatbot says 1 a.m., and the user says 1 p.m. This should probably have been caught by unit testing. I would say there's 2 failures here. So one is that there's the entity extraction was incorrect. So the user said 1 p.m., 1 a.m. was extracted. That's incorrect. Perhaps they expected them to say, 13 instead of 1. And the other thing that's happening is that the expected turn, I would guess here, is that the chatbot expects people to say yes. And if they don't say yes or no, has a problem with that. But in conversations, if you have misinferred information, I will just provide the correct information. I'm not going to say, no, you're wrong. Here's the correct information. So I think there's 2 failures here, and it should really been caught in unit testing. And then integration tests, my guess is that the emoji, transferring these characters into emojis is really platform specific. And my guess is that this worked well on some platforms, but not on the specific one that this user is using, which looks like Facebook Messenger maybe. Again, should have been caught in a test. And then finally, tracking. So like I mentioned, sorry, I scrolled. Measures are helpful. You do want them. And we talked about a number of them. So things like the key performance indicators, click-through rate, something that you can use to, at a high level, look at the success rate of your system is very helpful. Also, negative signals can be helpful. So do users not to do something after they have interacted with the system? That can be great. And then finally fixing, making sure that the things that you think happen are happening. If conversations are going well, you can add them as tests. If there are major issues with your systems, generally adding data is the most effective thing. Again, sort of based on my experience with people who are building systems in production. But there might also be bugs in the code. You might need to change your NLU pipeline or something. It really depends on what the problems are. And it's not a linear process. You're going to go back and forth and wrap around, and you'll do annotation, and that might lead to a test, and then that might lead to more annotation, and then you might need to fix something. So, and yeah, it's a lot of work. But also that is the work, if that makes sense. Trying to automate too many things in the evaluation pipeline tends to lead to systems that are bad to use. So 2016 here, I'm not calling out any system in particular. This was sort of if y'all remember, the heyday of chatbots on Facebook Messenger. So they launched their messenger service. There were a bunch of chatbots built. Many of them were very bad to use. And as a result, a lot of people had their first experience with chatbots, and that experience was a bad one. And I think we were growing and learning as a field, and there is absolutely space for that. But as a result, there's sort of a lot of ill will that's built up in users towards chatbots. In addition to the examples that I showed before, where systems just aren't working the way that users expect them to work. And users have very, very, very strong intuitions about conversations. So some final thoughts that didn't fit well in the, the flow of the rest of the discussion. So something that I've been thinking a lot about is, are we evaluating the things that are useful, or are we evaluating the things that are easy to measure? And I know that it is hard, and we are all busy, and the things that are useful are sometimes extremely time consuming to measure. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make space for them. And I think that also things like really detailed error analysis have a place in the research workflow, as well as the the practitioner workflow, but it's very much a part of the practitioner workflow. And yeah, we got it. We got to look at data. So in the in the deployment side, of course, you want to know what your users are doing. You want to make sure that you're fulfilling their needs. And I should put a little caveat here that looking at data, internally is going to be dependent on your, data use policy, which should be clearly communicated to users in their journey with your product, which I don't think should be a surprise to anyone. When should we retire old methods? I think this is a question I get a lot, particularly from people who are newer to the NLP space, where they've heard about something that's, reinforcement learning is an example, and they're like, well, hey, we don't need to do other stuff, or hey, neural natural language generation is a thing now. Do we really need to use templates still? Yes. I think that the only time when you should set aside an old method is when it doesn't solve a problem anymore. And I've built a lot of systems that use regexes and that are faster and more robust because of it. And then this one is more. This is something I more get from researchers, where there's a lot of worry about getting relevant data. And often those data reuse policies that I mentioned don't include, hey, I'm just going to share it with every researcher who asks. And I think if you went to insert big company here and we're like, hey, can I have a bunch of your data? They're probably going to say no. And they may or may not be justified in that. But usually in an industry setting, data availability isn't the problem, which can sometimes be a surprise to folks. So particularly in this type of model where I have a system that's already deployed, I have user data coming in every day. Like I mentioned, many systems to the tune of millions of queries. It is not hard for me to get more data because the data is being produced by the people who are using the system, and a lot of people are using the system. So that's not really the bottleneck for a lot of industry applications. Maybe for prototyping. And then one final sort of, I don't know, a little bit of a Debbie Downer point perhaps. Language technology is language technology, and that's human language, and humans know how language should go. And that's the bar that we have to meet, right? The expectations of users is that a conversational system will work like a conversation, and I know how a conversation should go. You know how a conversation should go. We may not agree on that thought of how the conversation should go, but we both have extremely strong expectations. And when those expectations are not fulfilled, we are frustrated, we are upset, we have a bad time. But the flip side of that is, because those are sort of the baseline expectations, when we meet them, people will just be like, okay, finally, dang. And I don't know, I hope at some point that NLP is on par with civil engineering in terms of not being especially glamorous, but, you know, an important part of people's life that, you know, works, and people are happy when it works and don't really notice it when it does. That's my future visioning for the field. All right, I didn't talk that quickly, but I have plenty of time for questions or just discussion. I think this is a very sort of high level talk about a lot about how things that don't work happen and get fixed in sort of the industry side of things. So I think there is hopefully lots of room for additional talking about it.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This is such a thought-provoking talk, and it's fascinating to hear that actually people in industry are doing more qualitative analysis than people in academia. Yes. Oh, are we?
Oh,
not again.
we have a problem with that at the moment. So you're gonna have to just talk loud.
Okay. But do people hear me on Zoom?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, it's fascinating to hear that people in industry are doing more qualitative analysis than people in academia. But you've seen how both sides of this equation work. How do you think we could shift the incentives, so that we would, as you say, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of extra investment of effort to do this kind of qualitative analysis, and we are incentivized to push out papers every 2 months. We just do not have the incentives to invest as much in qualitative analysis. Do you think this could change, and if so, how?
I mean, there's two, at least in my point of view, there's two sides there. So one is on the researcher side, right? Like, it takes a lot of time. And if you don't have, 18 eager undergraduates who just love to do qualitative analysis, can be very difficult to find the people hours. And the other side is that honestly, it's just harder to write a review for a paper that includes a lot of qualitative analysis, because I have to sit and think about it and learn about your use case and learn about the population and, develop my own understanding. And, it takes me longer to write a review for that type of paper than a system paper that's like, metrics, leaderboard, here you go. Publish, please. Yeah.
Bonnie has a question, which...
Can I ask it?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Lovely talk. I want to pick up on something you said, and maybe you're next to the last slide, where you said we're doing natural language and we can't get away from it. In graphics, they have this concept, as you well know, of the uncanny valley. And what we often do is try to avoid the uncanny valley by, I remember with our system, by putting sunglasses on the character. We didn't have to worry about where the character was looking, because if the character had to be looking somewhere, it would have fucked the whole thing up. So I'm just wondering, with these chatbots, whether there's a concept of things which will, I mean, which will gently show, I hate chatbots too, which would gently show that you are not talking to a human being, that you're talking to a chatbot, but you can still get through something. So maybe you could say something about that, because I'm sure you've thought about it.
Oh, I have. I have a lot of thoughts on that. So first off, I think there's an ethical issue in making sure that people know that they are talking to a chatbot. And that's, I'm not saying that the system I'm showing here is necessarily unethical, but I think that it is, frustrating for the user. So by default, all Raza bots, when you like initialize them, have, you ask, are you a bot? And the bot's like, yes, I'm a bot. And I think that that is a necessary part of any chatbot development cycle. Also, if people know that they're talking to a chatbot, usually they have a better experience because their expectation is a little bit lower. And also, it's like using Google search, right? You're not going to, I don't know, some people do, but generally I don't, for example, put a whole human language sentence into Google search. I'll use a search term, right? I'll use like the Boolean connectors and stuff like that. So people have an expectation of how to talk to a chatbot, and also are more forgiving of mistakes when they know that it's not a chatbot. So A, ethically tell people it's a chatbot. B, user experience is usually better when they do know it's a chatbot. And then C, I think there's a question really there about, or there was an aspect of your question about personas, right? So, and honestly, branding, I'm not a designer, but how do you make sure that your chatbot is clearly communicating that it's a chatbot, and also isn't off-putting to talk to? So our preferred approach is to this may sound a little bit weird, but we prefer cartoon avatars that are like clearly not humans. So it's actually down right now because we're doing all internal work on it. But we had a chatbot in our docs, and it was a bird called Sarah, which had it pronouns, was not gendered. A bird called Sarah that was like a little cartoon bird. It's an anagram of Raza, that was clearly not a person. And also, was right off the bat, hey, I'm a bot. If you interact with me, we're going to look at your conversations in the following way, blah, 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 full privacy disclosure. Yeah, so 3 things there. A, always disclose for ethical reasons. B, disclose for user interaction reasons. And C, choosing branding, a persona, like an agent representation that is, friendly and non-threatening and distinctly non-human can be very helpful and also satisfying. I think a good example of this, I don't know if they have a chatbot off the top of my head, but the Duolingo mascot, Duo, like that little green owl, has like, everyone knows it's not a person. Everyone knows it's not a real human being, but it has a very strong sort of personality. And if I were gonna, talk to Duo, I'd be like, oh, this is definitely a chatbot, but also, it's not off-putting to talk to. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I was also wondering whether, if I can follow up with this, I'm not sure people do know how to talk to chatbots. But one thing, for example, if you're talking to another person whom you're not familiar with, the other person might say, can you slow down one thing at a time? So people, when they're trying to accomplish something, will often volunteer additional information. This can screw up a system. So in a sense, you have ways of reducing people's expectation. I was wondering if you had thought about that also with respect to your bot.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to drill down a little bit. There's a couple strategies that we recommend there from a design perspective. So one is I'm going to set aside multi-intent. Also, we're working a lot internally on end-to-end, so there's no intent classification stage, but I'm just going to ignore both of those for right now. We can talk about them more if anyone's interested. So 2 situations, one where people are volunteering multiple pieces of information. So they might say something like, I want to book a flight, and that's what starts your turn. But they already say, I want to book a flight from Paris to Lisbon at 9 on Tuesday. Our approach to that is so we have in Raza, slots are variables that are stored over the course of a conversation. Anytime you extract information that could go into a slot, unless you explicitly say that it's not, it's going to be popped into that slot. So in that instance, when the sort of like information collecting was launched, it would already have extracted, locations and times and dates. I think those are the three things that I said in my little example. So sort of proactively getting that information and then having a confirmation. Hey, this is what I've understood so far. Is this all correct? And giving people a chance to do it. But that's really more, if your slots are filled preemptively. The other thing is when people. Two other things. I'm going to say two more things here. So one is when things don't work. So maybe people are trying to do multi-turn and you don't have multi-turn. My preferred method there is, if you can write bot responses or prompts in a way that helps, it's definitely the easiest solution. But other things that you can do is you can have a specific intent that is like, I can't do this yet. So an intent that captures the idea of a turn being out of scope. At which point you say, hey, you asked for this, I can't do that. Here's some things that I can do. Do you want to do one of these? And that's a great place for buttons as well, because people can click the button. They don't have to retype anything. And then the second thing is if there's something that's just confusing, so you hit you're below your confidence threshold, at that point, I think it can be really helpful to reiterate the specific things your chatbot can do. And hopefully it's also something you've done in the introductory turn, right? So like, hey, I'm Sarah, I'm a chatbot. If you talk to me, I might store the information to improve the system. I can answer questions about Raza, 2.0, that sort of thing. So those are three strategies that I sort of jumbled together, but preemptive slot extraction and filling, having a way to handle out of scope intent, so things that people ask about that your chatbot can't do but could feasibly do, and then finally a way to handle low confidence. And I would also recommend, just sort of as a design, if you have a couple turns of low confidence, kick people out of the bot into a human, and do that preemptively. Like really move as much as possible people out of the chatbot when it's not filling their needs, which hopefully you have a way of doing that.
Great. So thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Hey, Rachel, thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it, having worked a lot on chatbots and had my own frustrations and looking on data. Like one of the issues that I think we have a lot in academia is basically access to data. You talked about sort of the design process and cycle, but like, when we don't have data to evaluate, how do we bootstrap specifically as academics to be able to build systems and test that the systems are actually working? Do you have any ideas on that front?
That is a great question. I mean, there's a couple answers that I have there. So one is, maybe the easiest answer is collaboration. So to work with, a company that is planning on building and deploying a product. There are many challenges to that type of collaboration, but the benefit is that you don't have to work on the deployment and maintenance. It doesn't always work. The second approach, I think some people are going to be not delighted to hear me say, but human subjects research, right? You have a system, you expect it to interact with humans in some way. You really aren't going to know if it's going to do that unless you get it in front of humans. And I know that behavioral research and experimental design is a second subset of skills that takes time to develop and learn. To which I would say collaboration with other researchers could be really helpful. So a lot of folks in digital humanities have relevant background that could be helpful here. HCI is another really good field to reach out to, human-computer interaction. iSchools, a lot of iSchools will have relevant people who might be able to help with the behavioral side of things. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, if you have a system that you have built for people to use and people never use it, you cannot know how good the system is. And I know that that is frustrating to hear, and is going to add a year to your PhD if you're a PhD student. But that's just I don't have another answer for that. I'm so sorry.
No. I think, yeah, the more we think about it, yeah, the figuring out how to build and allow for us to have some data is like ways of engaging would be, sort of useful for everyone. I have one more question, but let's see is there any further questions from the crowd? Online people? Oh, now that I'm over here, I can't see them. Oh, okay. So my second question is more of a question about, you talked about different dimensions of evaluation. And it seemed like most of what you were talking about was really regarding like task driven evaluation. And so, but now we're getting to the point where on some of the chatbots, we want to do sort of a mixture of the two, but then it becomes even harder to evaluate. I know that you guys have been working on that a little bit. Do you have thoughts or ideas that you want to share with us about that?
Yeah, that is a great question. So perhaps I should have said at some point that RASA is a framework for sorry, my brain just turned off. Give me a second. Task-oriented dialogue systems. Wow. Task-oriented dialogue systems. You could use it for chit chat. It would be hard. That said, people definitely do want to chit chat with a chatbot. Our sort of way that we handle this, we recommend people handle this is again, I'm going to get a little bit more into details. So using sort of a nested intent classifier. So having a broad intent that's like, hey, this person's trying to chit chat with the bot, and then breaking it down into specific chit chat questions you expect and responses. And when that intent is detected, you bop down into the other intent classifier. It determines the intent and it picks the response, and then you're back into the rest of the flow of the conversation. So it works really well for sort of deviations. I say it can work really well for deviations. It depends on, what it is that the user's trying to do. Yes, I would say that that is a significantly harder problem in terms of evaluation. I don't love the metric that is commonly used, which is length of the conversation. So I don't know, this is something I've been thinking about more in generally in terms of systems that interact with people. I think that what makes people interact with something is not always good. And I think there's been a lot of discussion recently about how, for example, the revelation recently that for the Facebook algorithm, things got like a bigger boost in ranking if there was an angry emote interaction than other types of interactions. And I think you could, very easily make a chatbot that people would continue to interact with by having it say horrible things that made them angry. I don't think you should do that. And I think that that's really hard to quantify. And there've been, a number of really high profile examples of chatbots that were trained on user data. Microsoft's Tay being a really good one. And then earlier this year, there was I don't remember the name of the system off the top of my head, but it was a Korean chatbot trained on, I believe, messaging from a dating service that also had the same problems where it said horrible things about groups of people that I don't think the designers of the chatbot stood behind or intended. I don't know. I guess my real question is like, why are we building chit chat bots? Why is chit chat something that we need to do? And that in particular is one of those tasks where I can think of more negative aspects than positive aspects. Yeah, I don't know. That's my stance on it. I think task-oriented systems can be great. It's like a type of UI. I think that there's definitely a place for like games and artistic exploration of chatbots. I worry about why we want to have extended conversations with a system outside of curiosity, and what sort of perverse incentives might be created there. Yeah, we were recently talking with some ethicists at a consultancy about sort of the negative ramifications of chatbots and some of like the ethical perils. And I think that's one of them. That's the end of the sentence. I'm done. I'm making a worried face a lot. Yeah. Oh, someone has DM'd me to say that my kids really love chatting with chatbots.
Yeah.
Like they can be
there's a
good
question.
toys. But
Sorry, we have another audience question. They're coming up.
Okay.
Hi. It's not a question, actually, it's just a remark about what you just said. Actually, there was kind of a few presentation. Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you. So there were kind of a lot of presentation now on different kind of workshop dedicated to psychology about just about the benefits of chit chat with a chatbot, actually, in order to just assist and trying to solve sociological disorders and different kind of stuff like that. So maybe that's one of the leads that you can have to be able to chit chat with a chatbot.
Yeah. I understand that that is appealing. I would say that there's two things to think about there, which is A, I don't know that we need a neural system from that. I mean, people loved ELIZA, and ELIZA had very predictable output. ELIZA is a very early rule-based system based on not Jungian. The type of psychology where you repeat what somebody says is a question, and I forget what the specific type is. And the second thing to think about is if we want to get into the medical field and if we want to get into the therapeutic field, at what point do we develop a duty of care towards our users? Because I don't think in the US legally software engineers have a duty of care towards their users. Like I feel that I do on the inside. That's what my moral compass says. There are some services which provide, therapy, online, where that service and that interaction is not covered in the way that a discussion with a therapist in a medical setting would be. And I do worry along the lines of privacy, especially given, this is not going to be relevant for everybody, but like health insurance in the United States, they can use a lot of information to decide what your rates are going to be. And if they can infer information about you, about, say, conditions that they are allowed to raise your rates if they think that you might have, I don't see why they wouldn't do it if it's not illegal, right? I don't know. I understand the promise. I am just full of worry. I'm full of worry, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I do understand. Actually, it was more related to affective computing fields. And actually, they try now to, especially for instance in Marseille, there is a huge group that try to do that. Actually, they try to work with a kind of neurologists and psychologists, just in order to help create kind of a notion of presence and of support. Not especially a chatbot, but you have the underlying chatbot behind the actually the affective companion. So that's actually why maybe, of course, it doesn't work yet, but maybe that's why the reason you can have to have this.
And I think if there's strong legal protections for patients, I would be less worried about it, which there might be more of in Europe. I am less familiar.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think about that a lot.
Thank you. We have time for one more quick question. Anybody? Quick question in the chat? No? Okay, I have a quick question and you have 1 minute to respond. So I actually, to look at this slide, I really like the measure of how much time does this NLP system saves. But this makes me wonder whether we actually know that it saves time and provides the same output as you would with a longer process. I guess in a chatbot, if the goal is to buy a specific ticket, which you already know which one it is, you have the gold label. But in something that involves search, you may get a quick result, but it may be suboptimal and you will never know. So any thoughts? And you have 1 minute.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can actually have a very concrete example. So this is a chatbot to help homeless populations in, I believe, Toronto. I talked with the person on the podcast a while ago. And the big benefit of time saving was, I think they found about a 60x improvement in time from somebody trying to Google to find the resources. And also there was a time savings in terms of, page loading, because it was very fast. And a lot of the folks that were using it had very minimal data plans that are very slow. So yes, it can be hard to measure. And I think it is important that the task completed is the task that the user wanted to complete, but it can be, in practice, a very helpful thing. And I'll tweet about the system if you want to find out more about it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was amazing, and let's give a round of applause. And with that, we are on to our second poster session in Gather Town. So we can join and meet there. Thank you.